Hello and welcome to another W3schools Python tutorial. In today's lesson, we're going to start the variable section of the Python tutorial from the W3schools website. So in this section about variables, there are several subsections, but in this one, we're just going to go over variable names. Okay, so in Python, variables are containers for storing data values. You'll understand what this means in a sec. You don't need to overanalyze this. Okay, we'll just go over examples so you can visualize and understand what this means. So creating variables. Python has no command for declaring a variable. A variable is created the moment you first assign a value to it. Assigning a value means, this is what assignment means. Assigning a value. This is a value, so 5 is a value. It's a number that you're assigning to the variable x. John is a value. It's a string value that you're assigning to the variable y. And then you run a function called print, which prints the variable, and it should output 5 in this case. And in the other case, you're printing the y variable, which should output John. Let's give it a try. Now, don't try to think too hard and overanalyze. Just try to observe and do the same thing. Like, try the exercises on your own. It will really help you understand more quickly. So, okay, so let's take a look at this. So first, let me run it. Okay, so it's giving us 5 and John. So again, we're going to assign the value of 5 to the variable x. Let me comment it out, and I suggest you do the same thing, okay? Just so that you get the hang of working with Python, it's good to just type it out. Even though you can see it running, it's better just type it out yourself. Okay, so I'm going to comment everything out here. And nothing should show up on the screen here. There should be no output because I've commented everything out. Okay, I'm gonna then I'll write the first line. So I'll say here, try to follow along. So right here, try to code along at the same time. So write x is equal to 5 and then run it. Now, nothing's going to output because there's no print. You're not telling Python to output anything. You're just assigning the value of 5, the 5 integer or number to a variable named x. But it's not showing, 5 is not showing up, or the x variable is not showing up. In order to make it show up, you need to print it, right? So you can type out print x. Let's run it. And we see here 5. Now, so x is storing, remember, a variable is a container that's used to store a value. Okay, so x is a container. So when you have a container, you can remove something from the container and you can put something else in the container, right? So imagine you don't want 5, right? You want to put 7. So there would be, you could reuse this variable. You could say x is equal to 7. And instead of, I'll just run it to show you what's going to output. So you have 7 here. Now, why isn't 5 showing up? Because you're basically telling Python, okay, I don't want to store 5 anymore. I want this x container to store 7, the value of 7. So x is now just going to be storing the 7 value, not the 5 value. And then when you print it, right, because the print function or the line is just after 7 was assigned to x here, it's going to show up as 7. If I was to put print before you assigned 7 to x, so say I was to put print here, right? What do you think's going to show up? Do you think... So let's type the question here. Will this print 7 or 5? Okay, what do you think? Let's run it. I'm going to delete this here for now. And I'll delete this. And I'll move this up to down to here. Okay. Okay, so will the print function print 7 or 5? Let's see what it's gonna print. Five. Why? Because you're assigning the value 5 to x, and then you're telling Python to print it out right away. So at this point in the code, in the lines of code, the print instruction is just after you've assigned 5 to x, right? So it's printing out at this point, at this line, right? X contains 5. Okay, so that's why it's printing out 5. If you wrote here print x right after so I'll just put a hash mark here, prints 5. I'll just put here 5. Okay, what do you think it's going to output here? Right, 7, right? Because I'll just run it here. Right, because it's assigned a new value to the same variable. Okay, and the print line comes after the new variable, the new value was assigned, okay, to x. So that's why it's printing out 7. Okay, let's try their other example. So you can create another variable, and then you can assign it a string. So let's assign it the string Bob. Let's run that. And nothing is shown here, but if I print y, okay, I get the value. It prints out Bob. If I yeah, and then I can assign here, I can assign the same variable another name. Let's say Jeff. And it should, what do you think it's going to print out here? What do you think? Jeff, right? Because you've reassigned a new value to the same variable. Okay, after the first assignment. So you reassigned it Jeff. Okay, so that's why the y variable is printing out Jeff here. Okay, if you move to print up here, what would it print? Bob, right? Because at this point in the code, right, y is assigned Bob, not Jeff. But after, right, below here, it's assigned Jeff. So here it would print out. It would print out. What would it print out? Print out Jeff, right? Okay, and here Bob. Let's just test it. I could always be wrong, but let's take a look here. Okay, see here, Bob and then Jeff. The next example. So variables do not need to be declared with any particular type, and can even change type after they have been set. Okay, what do they mean by type here? Type, they're talking about, so is it a number? This is a type int, right? type integer. It's a number type or an integer type. And this is a string, right? A string type. That's what they mean by type. It's like, what type of value is it? Is it a number or is it a string? Okay, so let's try this example. So the point of this example is to show that you can first assign it a number or a certain type. So in this in this first line, it's assigning the variable x is being assigned the value 4, which is of type integer, and then in the next line, it's being assigned a string, right? The same variable is being assigned a string. So when you print it, you get Sally. Okay. And then if I wanted to assign it, say, a double, in programming, this is called a double, when you have a decimal and then a value in a number. Okay, so this is an integer, by the way, without a decimal. So this is a double. You'd have, I think a double actually has 2 zeros, but I'm not sure. Anyways, you'd have, it would print out this value here. Let's run it. Or it might print out 4, but I'm not. Let's just take a look. Okay, so 4.0. So Python is printing out a double now. So the point again is, okay, so once you declare a variable, you can assign it a different multiple types. Okay, you're not stuck with a specific type. I think they call that in other programming languages, that's called strict typing. But anyways, I'm not sure, but yeah, so this was the point. You can assign it multiple types, more than one type. You're not stuck with string. X isn't purely, you don't only have to assign it. You can't, sorry, you're not forced to assign it just strings. You can assign it numbers also. Okay, let's go on to the next example. Okay, casting. So if you want to specify the data type of a variable, this can be done with casting. Okay, casting. It's a kind of a complicated word for saying where you're gonna force the type. You're gonna cast the type, the existing value into a type. So you're forcing this 3 integer into a string. You're casting 3 into a string. Here you're casting 3 into an integer. It was already an integer, but you're casting it into an integer. Here you are casting 3 into a float. Okay, let's try that. Okay, so let me run this. Okay, so we're able to cast, in this case, we were able to cast the 3 value or 3 number or integer into a string. And then it print out X. Let me just comment this out here, just so we can focus. Okay, so I'll run this. Okay, and I'm getting 3. Now, in order to know that this is a string, I'm going to add another string. I'm going to concatenate this to string. Okay, and I'm going to run it. Okay, and it worked. Now, if this wasn't cast into, if this 3, okay, wasn't cast into a string, it would throw an error. So I'm going to remove this. Now, what do you think Python is trying to do here? you're trying to tell Python, okay, I have this number 3. I want to concatenate this to a string. Okay. But this isn't going to work. Let's try it. It says unsupported operand types. You can't add an integer and a string. Okay, it doesn't work in Python. So the way around that is to cast by using this str and then open parentheses, close parentheses, a function, str, or a casting function, over the number. Let's run it. Okay, so now it works because Python is casted this number into a string, and then you're able to add it to a string. I could change this to apples, 3 apples. Okay. 3 apples. And then I could, what else could I do here? Let me see if I can do an operation inside of here. So 3 times 5 is 15 apples. You see how inside of this, these parentheses, you're able to put, run this math. So 3 times 5, and it gives you an output of 15, and then cast that into a string, and then add it to the apples string. Okay, which is interesting. Maybe you might want to apply this in in some kind of program that you write that checks how many apples you have, and then you have to be able to output this in the screen. So this is the way to do it. You'd cast the number into a string. Okay, let's look at the next example here. So the y variable. So in this case, 3 is already an integer, and you're just making sure that it's an integer, so you're casting the integer again. You might want to do this in case you're not sure if the value is an integer. So by doing this, you're making sure that it's an integer. I'll just run this. You get 3. I'm curious what happens if I write integer. No, it doesn't. It's not interpreted as valid syntax. Let me run it. You have to really in order to cast it into an integer, you have to use int. Now what happens if I put 3.25, a double or a float in here? Will it round down? It rounds it down to 3. Okay, that's interesting. So if you put a decimal value with a decimal, it's integers are whole numbers. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think 0 is also included. But so it will cast the value with a decimal into a whole number. So it will round, in this case, round down. What if we put it 0.6? Will it round up? Let's see. No, it rounds down. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, and then lastly, casting. Let's cast 3 into a floating point. That means that you have a decimal point. Okay, I'm gonna comment that out and print z. So here we're declaring we have a variable named z, and then we're going to assign it this value of 3, which was casted into a float. Okay, and I'm going to print that. Okay, and we get 3. So what's the lesson here? So the lesson here is So in Python, you can cast values and then assign them to the variable. Okay, you can cast. The casting means doing this, right? str to cast into a string, int to cast it into an integer, or float to cast it into a floating point. There are other ways to cast. This is just some of them, but the point of this is just talk about variables for now. Okay. The next lesson. Okay, get the type. You can get the data type of a variable with the type function. Okay, that's interesting. So the type function. So this will return the data type of the variable. Let's try that. Okay, so here we have, so this is an integer and this is a string. Okay, and if we use this function type, called type, or name type, and we put the variable inside of it, it will output. If we put it inside of a print function, it will output the type. So it's saying this is of class int and this is of class string. So I suggest you try this also. So comment out the first one just to simplify things. And then remove the print here just for now, just to see what happens. Okay, run it. Nothing's going to output because you're not printing anything. But if you type print, okay, and then inside of that print, you put this code here, which is basically saying, okay, I want to know what type this X variable is, and I want it to be printed out. So then it will show us that this is, Python will then say this is class int or type int. Okay. And then here, if we try the next variable, what do you think this is? What type is this? String, right? So let's run it. And we're going to get an error because I'm printing something which wasn't defined, right? This variable wasn't defined. So it's trying to print, it's looking for the type of something which wasn't defined. See, it's throwing an error, line 4. And then it's trying to print something which there's an error already thrown for. So I'm going to comment that out. And it's saying class str. Now, I don't know why they choose str instead of just calling it string, but that's what they use, right? str. I'm curious if it is possible to cast this into a string. Let's just see what happens here. I'm going to go like that. I'm going to string. I'm going to put the value. I'm going to use an integer. I'm going to try to cast it into a string using this string function, which shouldn't work because they use str, but let's just try it. Yeah, it doesn't work. A string is not defined. So you have to use the right function name to cast, which is str. Okay, so yeah, it did work. So I was able to cast this 3 into a string, and then it's gonna output. I'm using the type function to figure out what type this variable is. Okay, so just to break it down here. Okay, I'm gonna delete this. So to break it down in pieces here, Okay, so you have a value 3. I'll just delete this to make it more clear. Okay, you have a value 3. You've casted it into a string. You've assigned it, to the variable called y. Okay, then you're trying to determine the type of it. So you're saying type y, putting it in the middle here. And then you're going to print it out to see what the outputs right in this, and then you end up with str. Okay, class str. I'm gonna change this back to just a string, just to make it more simple here, and you should have the same output. Okay, so what's the lesson here? Lesson here is you can use the type function to determine the type of the variable. Okay, now one last thing. I just want to see if this type function works with just values instead of variables, right? This is a variable. This is a value. So we'll see here. I'm gonna get rid of this. Oh, yeah, I'll get rid of it. Oh, I'll comment this out. Comment this out. And then I'm gonna write type. I'll put the Bob in here. Run it. It's not going to output anything. It might output an error. This is just a test to see what's going to happen. I have a feeling it's going to work. So it doesn't output anything. So now I'm going to put this as print. And then it should say string. Okay, so it works. So this type function, it doesn't only need to be used with variables. You can also use it with values. Okay, so the value here is Bob. Okay, value Bob. Okay, and then the variable here is y. Okay, so you're assigning the string, okay, Bob to y. I'll remove this cast thing just so that I don't confuse you. And then you are printing it. And then you're using this function type to determine the type. Okay. I hope that is not confusing you too much. It's just to show you that you can use this type function to determine the type not only of a variable but also of a value. Okay. Like I could put in here I could put 5 and it would show up as integer. Run that. I have to put print here. Print. Run. Okay, int. Okay. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so single or double quotes. So string variables can be declared either using single or double quotes. Oh, okay. So let's try this. Okay, this is an easy one. So you have the variable named x and you're assigning it a string using double quotes, John, which is basically in between double quotes. I suggest you try this. You comment that out and then write x is equal to John. Okay, and then if you print it, you'll have John, right? And then notice how this is uppercase and then lowercase, right? Because I'm printing it out after, I'm printing X after it was defined, or the value John in lowercase was assigned here. And then I'm reassigning a new value with an uppercase, John with an uppercase, and I'm using single quotes. Okay, it says here double quotes are the same as single quotes. So I suggest you comment that out and you do the same. So X is equal to John, single quotes, and then print. Should print the same thing. Okay, and if you want to experiment with this, you can try single quotes and double quotes. Let's try one single quote and one double quote and see what happens. Okay. So let's go to the next one. Next example. Case sensitive. Okay, variable names are case sensitive. I just want to see how much more is left here. Okay, that's the last one. Okay. So variable names are case sensitive. So try that. What do they mean by case sensitive? They mean uppercase, or lowercase, right? So this is uppercase and this is lowercase. Okay. So the variable a lowercase is not the same as the variable a uppercase. So if you print this, it's not the same variable that's being printed. Okay, so if I write here, so here, right, a is equal to 4, okay, and then if they were the same, right, and you wrote a lowercase is equal to 4 and then a uppercase was equal to Sally, you would expect that by printing a you would end up with Sally, but because it's printing out 4, it just shows you that they're not the same. Okay, so lowercase and uppercase variable names are interpreted independently. Okay. We'll just I'll run that, and then I'm gonna put this in comments. Nothing's gonna print out because I've commented this out. Multi-line comment. Remember in the other lesson we went over that. So if I wanted to call this, say, variable, I don't know, b is equal to 5, and then I could say b is equal to Jeff. Okay, I'll print b. Okay, just to show you, and it should show, Jeff should show up. Okay, now if I write the letter uppercase B, okay, and then I assign it Jeff, what do you think this is going to print? Uppercase Jeff or lowercase Jeff? Right, it's going to print the lowercase one, right? Because this is a completely new variable, right? Python is case sensitive. It would treat the uppercase B as a completely new variable. Let's run it. Okay, see, that's why this is lowercase. Okay, so the lesson here is just, you can write this out just so you remember. Lesson is that Python treats uppercase and lower case variable names independently or differently. Yeah, independently. Okay. So it doesn't cast everything to lowercase. It treats them independently. Okay. Okay, so that is that. So in this lesson, we went over a lot. So we went over creating variables, casting variables into different types. We went over figuring out the type by using the type function. We went over the use of single or double quotes in when assigning a string to a variable. We went over how Python is case sensitive for variable names. Okay, in the next lesson we're gonna go over. Let me just see here. I think we already went over this variable names. Oh, more stuff about variable names. Okay, so that's what we're gonna do in the next lesson. Actually, this is important because in programming, you're really going to be doing a lot of variable naming, and you have to know how to name variables correctly so that you don't have any errors. And it also helps you to read your code a lot more efficiently. So this is, even though it might be boring, it's really helpful. Okay, so thanks again for watching, and see you in the next one.